Hi everyone, welcome to the Chapter 1 and 2 answer key. So just a quick note before I get started. Your questions from the quiz were pulled from a larger pool of questions. So you might notice that some of the questions I go over are a little bit different from the ones that you saw on your quiz. However, I'm still going to go over every single question, so you will see me going through your questions as well. It just might be in a different order than what you saw on the actual quiz individually. So let's get started with the first one. So here we have last week an organic produce farm delivered 11 3/8 pounds of green leaf lettuce, 3 7/16 pounds of romaine lettuce, and 9 5/6 pounds of red leaf lettuce. All we're doing here is finding the total weight, and that means that we are going to add each of these up. So that's 11 3/8, 13 7/16, and 9 5/6. And so the first thing we need to do is to figure out the least common denominator. To do that, we're going to take the largest denominator and go from there. So if we multiplied 16 by 2, that would give us 32. However, 6 doesn't go into 32, so let's see, 16 times 3, and 16 times 3 is 48. And all three denominators can go into 48, so 8 can go into 48. And that is 6 times. 16 can go into 48 3 times, and 6 can go into 48 8 times. So whatever you do to your denominator, you have to do to your numerator. And here, if I multiply 8 by 6, I need to do the same thing to my numerator. So 3 times 6 is 18, 7 times 3 is 21, and 5 times 8 is 40. And notice that I'm only concentrating on the fractions part first rather than the whole numbers. Because this is simple addition, we have all of the same denominators. I'm going to add each of the numerators. So 18 plus 21 plus 40. And this gives me 79 over 48. Because I have an improper fraction, what I'm going to do now is to convert it to a regular fraction or a proper fraction. So this is the same as doing 48. How many times does that go into 79? Okay, so this is 1 and 31 over 48. So now that I have 1 and 31 48ths, that's just my fractions, I can add that to my whole numbers. So 11 plus 13 plus 9. That gives me 33. 33 plus 1 and 31 48ths gives me a total of 34 and 31 48ths. And let's take a look at the second one. Here we have an electrician that bought a 100-foot roll of 12-gauge copper wire. They used 32 7/12 feet for one job and 26 3/4 for a second job. How many feet of wire remained on the roll? So there's a few ways that we can do this. We can subtract the 32 7/12 and the 26 3/4 directly from 100. Or we can add what was used and then subtract that from 100, which is what I'm going to do. So if we take 32 7/12 and add 26 3/4, again, I'm going to look for the least common denominator. In this case, that's 12. 4 can go into 12 3 times, so I'll multiply both the top and bottom by 3. This gives me 16 as my numerator, 12 as my denominator. Converting this gives me 1 4/12, which is the same as 1 1/3. Now I'm going to add my whole numbers, and 32 plus 26 is 58. So 1 1/3 plus 58 is 59 1/3 feet that was used. To find out how much was left, I'm going to take 100, which is the same as 100 over 1, and then I'm going to subtract 59 1/3. And this gives me 40 2/3 left. So how I got 40 2/3 is to first make sure that we have the same denominators. So let's say I have 59 1/3 here. What I'm going to do to make sure that I have 3 as my denominator for my 100 is do 3 over 3. This equals 1 whole. And I'm going to take 99. And that's because I'm taking 1 whole out of this 100. Okay, and so again, 3 over 3 is the same as 1. And I just borrowed 1, so 100 minus this 1 here, and that gave me this 99 here. So 99 3/3 minus 59 1/3 gives me 40 2/3. Next, let's take a look at this one. Here we have 3 workers who cleaned 5.5 acres of land. One cleaned 2 1/3, and another cleaned 1 3/4. And it's asking how many acres the third worker cleaned. So I'm going to start by adding how much had been cleaned by the first and second. So 2 1/3 plus 1 3/4. And now I'm going to find my least common denominator, which is 12. So I'm multiplying 4 by 3 and 3 by 3, which gives me 9. 3 times 4 is 12. And I'll do the same thing to my numerator, which gives me 4. This gives me 13/12, which is equivalent to 1 1/12, plus my whole numbers. 2 plus 1 is 3, gives me 4 1/12. So this is how much was cleaned. But remember that it's asking you how many did the third worker clean. So if there was a total of 5 1/2 and 4 1/12 was cleaned, I'm going to subtract it to see what was how much the third worker cleaned. So this can say as 4 1/12, 5 1/2 becomes 5 6/12. And so this is 5/12 and 1. So 1 5/12 is how much the third worker cleaned. Okay, here it says that a landscape contractor assigned 2 employees to plant several hundred shrubs. After a week, 1 employee planted 1/3 of the shrubs and the second employee had planted 2/5. What fraction of the shrubs remained to be planted? So let's add 1/3 plus 2/5. The least common denominator is 15 for both of them. This gives me 11/15 as the amount that had been planted. And now I need to figure out how much remains. And so I'm going to take one whole, which is equivalent to 15 over 15. And then I'm going to subtract how much had been planted. So 15 fifteenths minus, oops, not 11 fourths, but 11 fifteenths gives me 4 fifteenths. And 4 fifteenths is the fraction of shrubs that still need to be planted. Let's take a look at this question. So a woodcutter estimated that his small pickup truck could hold 2/3 of cord, 2/3 cord of firewood, but it actually carries 5/9. What I'm going to do is to calculate the difference between his estimate and actual load. The key word here is different, indicating that I do need to subtract. And so that gives me 5/9 minus 2/3. And so if I get my least common denominator here, which happens to be 9, so 3 times 3 is 9, so I multiply 2 by 3, that gives me 6. Notice that I have 5 minus 6, which would give me -1. So this tells me that there is a 1/9 difference between the estimate and actual load. In this question, we have a car that can travel 32 miles on 1 gallon of gasoline. How far should it be able to travel on 3 3/4 of gasoline? And so what I'm going to do is to multiply it, because it can go 32 miles on 1 gallon. And I'm doing 32 over 1 because 32 over 1 is the same as 32. And we're going to multiply this by 3 3/4. When we're multiplying, make sure that you convert a mixed number to an improper fraction. So 3 3/4 gives us 3 times 4, which is 12. 12 plus 3 is 15, so 15 fourths. Okay, now I'm going to reduce, so 32 and 4 are both divisible by 4. 32 divided by 4 gives me 8. So now I have 8 over 1 times 15 over 1. 8 times 15 is 120. 1 times 1 is 1. And so 120 is how far the car should travel on 3 3/4 gallons of gasoline. And let's take a look at the last fraction problem. So here a lawnmower manufacturer claims that one of its newer lawnmowers will run for 2 hours and 40 minutes on 1 quart. If the claim is true, how long should the lawnmower run on 3 1/2 quarts of gasoline? There is a little hint here saying that 40 minutes is 2/3 of an hour. So we can convert this 2 hours and 40 minutes to 2 2/3. And we can multiply that by 3 1/2. So remember that whenever we have mixed numbers, this needs to be converted to an improper fraction. So 2 2/3 converted gives us, let's say, 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. So that 2/3 times, and then let's take a look at this. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. So times 7 over 2. Okay, and let's take a look at this. So 8 and 2 are both divisible by 2. If we divide 8 by 2, that gives me 4. 4 times 7 is 28. 28 over 3 is my improper fraction. I got 3 because I simply multiplied my denominators. 3 times 1. Now I can convert this back to a mixed number. And so 3 can go into 28 9 times. And so let's see what this would look like. 3, 28, 9. 3 times 9 is 27. This gives me 9 1/3. Okay, here we have Hilo Lunch Up had 8.6 pounds of pork on Wednesday morning. They received 20.9 on Wednesday. And then on Thursday morning, they had 8.9 pounds on hand. So we want to see how many pounds it used on Wednesday. What I'm going to do is to just take out my calculator. You can also do this in Calculatoria or just your regular phone calculator or your computer calculator. So I'm going to take the original 18.6. I'll add the 20.9 that they received. And if they had 8.9 pounds on hand left on Thursday, what I'm going to do is to subtract the 8.9. And so this tells me that they used 30.6 pounds just on Wednesday. In this example, we have a fresh produce wholesaler. They shipped 247.8 pounds of bananas, 163.6 pounds of papayas, and 109.7 pounds of pineapples. The total weight of the fruit shipped was 521.1. So we're just adding those three numbers together. In this next example, let's say that Jordan's Pet Store had $468.42 cash on hand. They received payments of $62.88 and $59.41, and then they paid out $56.50. So we just want to figure out how much they had left. So I'll take that $468.42, which is what they originally had, and I'll add their cash payments that they received. And then I'm going to subtract what they paid out. And so this gives me $534.21. This was another relatively simple one. Let's say that CVS started with $124.57 worth of dental floss. They received $42.44 worth, and then they sold $89.99. So I added the $42.44, now I'm going to subtract the $89.99. And this gives me $77.02 was the remaining value. Okay, next we have Hawaiian Style Cafe. They originally had $356.87. They had total cash receipts from lunch in the amount of $873.45 and $1,462.55 from dinner. If they paid $2,200 to a security service, what was the remaining amount of cash on hand? So let's take the original amount of cash on hand. We'll add their receipts, and then we're going to subtract the $2,200 in cash that they paid out. And this gives me $492.87. Next, let's take a look at this example where Ace Hardware sells most kinds of nails. Let's say a contractor bought 6.8 pounds of nails, roofing nails, 7.5 pounds of 10-penny nails, and 8.2 pounds of 8-penny nails. All we're doing here is calculating the total pounds. So I'll take 6.8 plus 7.5 plus 8.2, and that gives me 22.5 total pounds of nails that the contractor purchased. Here it says Puna Landscaping bought 3 trucks loaded with topsoil to a job site. 2 of the trucks carried 7.75 cubic yards each. 1 carried 5.25 cubic yards. When the job was finished, 3.25 cubic yards remained. And so we want to find the number of cubic yards that was used. And so let's add what all 3 trucks carried. So 2 trucks carried 7.75, so 7.75 plus 7.75. The third truck carried 5.25. That gives me 20.75. If there was 3.25 cubic yards remaining, I'm going to subtract that. This tells me that 17.5 cubic yards was used. Here we have an office administrator who finished word processing a 2-page letter and its envelope in a total of 13.8 minutes. It took him 5.9 minutes for the letter, for page 1 of the letter, and 3.8 minutes for the second page. And so with that, we want to then compute the time that he spent printing the letter and preparing the envelope. So we're going to take the total amount spent, which was 13.8 minutes. I'm going to subtract how long it took him to type the first page and how long it took him to type the second page. This gives me 4.1 minutes as the amount of time that it took to print the letter and prepare the envelope. So here we have Subway. They had 26.8 pounds of salami on Monday. So let's type that in. They received a shipment of 84.9 pounds. So I'm going to add that. And they also used 42.8 pounds. So I'm going to subtract 42.8. And they also sold 32.4 pounds. Okay, and that tells me that their remaining amount is 36.5 pounds. In this question, we are just calculating the total amount of produce that was sold on both days. So let's take 11.8 plus 18.3. I'll also take 12.5. That was just for Tuesday. Now I'm going to calculate for Saturday as well. So I'm adding 19.4, 31.7, and 22.6. And so this tells me that 116.3 pounds was sold on both days. In this question, we have Ace Hardware. They sell rubber tubing by the foot. If a 70-foot roll of tubing eventually sells for a total of $54, how much did the store charge per foot? So what we're going to do here is to take what they sold it for in total, so 54, divided by 70 feet, and this gives me 0.77, which is equivalent to 77 cents. And so this is a similar question. Here we have a warehouse selling a package of 125 steel washers for $2.50. What is the price per washer? So we're going to take the total cost of $2.50 divided by 125 washers, and this gives me 0.02, or about 2 cents per washer. In this question we have Filet-O-Fish. They sell halibut for $16.49 a pound and red snapper for $11.69 per pound. What is the total cost of 1.55 pounds of red snapper and 2.77 pounds of halibut? And so let's calculate the halibut first. So that's 16.49 times 2.77 pounds. That gives me $45.67, or roughly 68 cents just for the halibut. And the red snapper was $11.69 times about 1.55 pounds, which gives me $18 and about 12 cents. So let's add those two together. And this tells me that it costs about $63.80 for the 1.55 pounds of snapper and 2.77 pounds of halibut. Let's take a look at the final question that some of you might have had. So Costco sells laptops for $456 a piece and desktops for $530. What is the total cost of 12 laptops and 10 desktops? So I'm going to calculate the laptops first. So 456 times 12, that gives me 5,472. That's just for the laptops. As for the desktops, that's 5,300, because 530 times 10, we can always verify that by multiplying, again, 530 times 10. That was just for the desktops, so let's add up the laptops. So that is plus 5,472. So the total cost for 12 laptops and 10 desktops is 10,772.